There should have been sort of a retribution or a reckoning, a consequence for my actions. And he extended kind of the olive branch to me and forgave me. I was ready for the fight. I wasn't ready for the proverbial peace pipe. And I just reflected on my life and thought, this has got to be different. My choices have to align to something else.
Baby boomers and the silent generation are expected to pass down a combined $84.4 trillion in assets to younger generations over the next 2 decades. Will the younger generations be ready to receive, steward, maintain, and grow that wealth? Real legacy is so much more than just the financial. It's about passing down values, family identity, and hard-earned wisdom. How does one go about passing down that intangible wealth to the next generation? This week, I want to share with you a conversation with my good friend David McAlvany. His weekly commentary is one of the few podcasts that I religiously listen to as soon as it publishes every Wednesday. He is an expert in precious metals and leads the McAlvany Financial Group as a second-generation visionary. His father founded and built the business before David took the helm, an interesting legacy case study in of itself. David has a lot of insight into this idea of passing the torch of not just wealth and how to manage it, but the principles of creating wealth and the incredible lessons learned throughout life. So enjoy our conversation, and on the backside, I'll share a few thoughts on how we can begin to engage and interest the younger generation in these concepts. But for now, sit back and enjoy this latest episode of the Freedom Founders podcast.
The longer I live, this is a significant year for me. I turned 50 in December. I've got an 18-year-old son who's heading off to college. We've got some significant sort of milestones in the family, 25th anniversary this year for Mary Catherine and I. You know, it's humbling to have written a book and look back even 5-6 years ago and say there is a vast difference between theory and practice. And, you know, there's the ideals and then the realities that we face every day and the decisions that we have and the encounters that we have with family members. You know, it's not always easy, and it's not as clear cut as it is on the page in real life. So I'm grateful to be here with you. I would say, as I think I did in the beginning of the book, that I'm a would-be practitioner. There's still a lot that I'm learning, and we're in a new phase of life, you know, with kids getting ready to launch. And man, I mean, the lessons keep unfolding. So I'm a fellow student in this endeavor. Don't claim to be an expert. The experience we do have that we've gotten to reflect on is working with 50,000 families, different clients, different stories, and seeing different things that have been done right and wrong. And you know, you can see where sophisticated estate planning and sort of the hard structures have been put into place, and a lot of times that's not done. So those are probably the easiest to take care of. The stuff that's harder is, you know, what we would call soft structures. And that's where doing life with other people can get messy. We have our own personalities, we have our own priorities, our own ideals, and kind of melding those together in a family construct. You know, that's where all of a sudden that idea of expanding out a balance sheet, we can look and say, oh, here's the assets that we have in the bank, in real estate, in precious metals, in, you know, stocks and bonds and what have you. And those are pretty easy to account for. You can see growth, you can measure growth, and you can look at benchmarks, you can measure success. When you expand out the balance sheet to include the intangibles, that's where it can get, you know, you don't have a way of measuring really. All of that is, you know, you can't put it on a spreadsheet. You know, how mature are my kids? Do I rate them on a scale of 1 to 10? You know, what are we learning about trust and communication skills and active listening? Rate myself on a scale of 1 to 10. I mean, that might be a helpful exercise, but it's not, you know, we don't get the monthly statement. We don't get the annual overview. And I think sometimes that's why it's neglected, is because we don't have easy metrics. But it's important nonetheless to look and say, okay, if we want to build a legacy, what is this that carries on beyond us? You know, beyond having a name on the side of a building or having achieved, you know, $1 million goal, a $10 million goal, $100 million goal, whatever it may be. When we think about culture, That's what we're really talking about when we're talking about that intangible balance sheet. How are we cultivating? How are we curating? How are we inspiring? How are we guiding? And how are we learning as we go? Because none of us are experts. We reach out for extra resources, we read lots of books. One of the things that I appreciate about you, David, and about Freedom Founders as well is that this is it's a group of curious people and lifelong learners. So that's what we're here today to do, is just to continue to learn together. And I don't think any of us are here to say, all right, I got it. There's always more to learn. And there's ways that we can grow. There's some practical things that I wrote into the latter part of the book, about mottos and codes of conduct and things like that might be helpful. Oddly enough, it was a group of dentists in the Pacific Northwest that had this book as a kind of a book club read, and the intentional legacy. And they wrote me and they said, have you put together a study guide? Because by the way, we thought it was necessary, so we put one together ourselves. But that's that's great. Can I see what you've got?
Right.
And so we did. I don't know if you're aware of this, David, but about 2017, 2018, basically 8 different exercises, a study guide for the intentional legacy, and just some questions to ask and some conversations to have, and it could be a helpful resource in terms of being a conversation starter within the family. I think, as you mentioned earlier, it's sometimes hard to go to certain places, particularly when you don't feel like you're leading as the expert, but you still have ideals or things that you'd like to see accomplished, but you know that there's more that you don't know than that you do. And having just something as a reference, a jumping off point into conversations, can be helpful. That's really what Mary Catherine and I wanted the intentional legacy to be, was conversation starter. A cup of coffee on a Saturday morning and a couple saying, time is short. From this point in our lives to wherever the end point is, how do we want to account for the decisions that we're making and have them be as valuable as possible? Can we reverse engineer our highest ideals and expectations, back them up to this point in time where all very small and practical things, but they aggregate to our life story from this point forward. And what does that look like for us? Here's what McAlvany says. Well, what does that mean for us? Yeah, we like this, we don't like that. It was not meant to be sort of an ABCs of legacy as much as it is, can we jumpstart a conversation?
I have one child, a daughter. She's out of the house now. She's in her early 30s. God's grace to see her through her health challenges. I have no young ones at home, but it's never too late. Your legacy, no matter where your generations may sit today. But I know we have many of our members do have children, as you do, at home, and certainly one ready to launch. Some have some that are relatively young, but interspersed throughout. I'm interested to hear from you today, particularly with the advent of technology, social media. Oftentimes, we have parents that are busy in separate careers, trying to raise a family. How do you bring back traditions, rituals, codes of conduct? How do you create those times to have those conversations, David, with a family when everybody is off doing everything and they're on these all the time? I'm sure you have instituted some codes within your own family. Can you speak to a little bit to that, and what you see is we're losing what I grew up with back in the 60s and 70s. I think we've lost a lot of that. My family got together for meals, breakfast and dinner when we were off to school during the school year, and it was family time. We had traditions and rituals on Sunday evening. Maybe it was watching Disney with TV trays. I mean, we had our faith and our church that we had, that was built around. I don't know that we have that so much anymore. So what can we do to offset the negativity with technology and culture today that seems to be pulling the family apart?
Something that's very important to our family, and this would be one of those things that is sort of a defining value for us, which is hospitality. Out of that hospitality comes this idea that, we set a table and we invite people into something that's beautiful. Last night was guys' night, and we invited our godson over. And so he came over, and he was like, "Hey, could we make gnocchi?" And I've never made gnocchi before, not from scratch. And So we set out on this little mini adventure of creating this beautiful meal that we share together. And it's at the table that we have dynamic conversation. And some of it's, catching up, how's your week? What's going on? You've got finals coming up. And some of it stretches to the theoretical as we finish dinner and, sit around the fire ring last night. To your point, my 10-year-old comes outside and he carries his computer with him.
Mhm.
And I don't know what he's doing on his computer. I'm like, we're just going to chat. Why don't you leave the computer inside and join us? And he kind of looks at me like, but but and it's a fight. It is a fight, whether it's at the dinner table, like, kind of our rule is that, technology is not at the table with us. And so, cell phones, leave them in the kitchen, leave them in your room, leave them someplace else. But that's a time where, just a simple rule of let's connect and let's do that in a way that's honoring to everybody at the table. And, you've got my full attention. If it's 20 minutes, if it's an hour, what have you. If something comes up in a conversation at the table, there's a polite request, hey, can I grab my phone and look that up? Because I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, sure. But otherwise, that's a little boundary that allows for us to engage. And I think setting the table for us, that's a lot of what sort of cultural curation ends up being is creating opportunities for meaningful conversations to occur, for meaningful connection to occur. As our kids leave the house, we're going to have to stretch our imaginations to how do we do that metaphorically? How do we set the table and invite them in, invite their friends in, invite, their families to engage in that way? Is that meeting up a couple times a year? We live in a place that's beautiful, but it's not exactly a place where you would go to start a career. So I can imagine all four of our kids being spread out all across the country. My hope is that technology actually enables connection, whereas today it's something that represents an impediment to connection. If we allow it to, we use WhatsApp and Signal to keep in touch with my parents. They live in the Philippines. All of us are on one thread. And every time somebody has a birthday, that's on a family calendar. I'm glad somebody else keeps it because I can hardly remember my own kids' birthdays. I get this ding on the phone and, oh, it's my sister-in-law's birthday. And I get to comment on it and say hello. And, it's this reminder, and technology is actually enabling that connection.
Mhm.
There's a balance between good and bad. Setting some boundaries is important. But for us, it centers around what our values are. And for us, being heard and being paid attention to, being honored, these are things that it's the way we've determined we're going to relate to each other when we have time together. So the values drive setting the table and the way that we engage at the table. And now we're going to have to get creative. What does it look like to metaphorically set the table with our kids out and about, spread across the country, maybe the world?
I remember when I was early teen, and my my loving mother always cared about what my thoughts were. I didn't want to tell her anything. Oh, I wasn't hiding anything. I just didn't have time. I didn't care. All my thoughts were in my head. And so for a few years, I think I was probably not very communicable. I wasn't a bad kid. I wasn't a rebel, but I just wouldn't want to go there. And yet we still had a family that was a strong unit. Where do you start with? Because all the kids are different. So how do you kind of bring them together with all their different personalities and get them in a common thread where they find some enjoyment and start these meaningful conversations? Who starts it? Is there an agenda? Do you bring something forward to start a topic, or is it just organically? We're together here. We do this on a regular basis, and someone pipes something out, and then you just roll with it. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easier to structure your schedule when kids are younger, and it gets harder as kids get older. So, the pattern that we've had is morphing over time, but the pattern that we have had, Tuesday night, Mary Catherine and I are out. That's our date night. And the kids recognize that as sort of like a monumental event during the week. And I love it that they've come to see that as an expected norm within a married couple's life. It's important for us to spend time together. We didn't get married with sort of the primary motivation to populate the planet. We got married because we love each other and we wanted to spend time together. And, it's a priority for us. And we set that time aside every week. And, if there's something that's coming up, like if I'm going to be traveling on a Tuesday, the kids are the first to ask, when are you going to do date night this week? I mean,
Mm.
they're holding on to this with an expectation of, well, this is what normal is. If it's not going to happen, that's not normal. And are you guys okay? There's like an expression of our value set in that. That's Tuesday night. So Tuesday night is date night. Wednesday night, if we can, we do games. Sometimes that's a board game. A lot of times we play cards. Probably every 4 to 6 weeks, we sort of interpose a family meeting before playing games. And so if there's things that we need to clear the air on, things we need to talk about, frustrations, summer's coming up. This week we've got 5 books for each of the kids to read through the summer months. We kind of cover that ground with the expectation of, hey, you can't wait until the last month to read 5 books. You're going to need to read for an hour or two per day to get it done. Make sure that that happens before you do this, this, and this. So, we kind of have our family meeting on occasion, but game night is an opportunity for us to enjoy doing something together. And what we're trying to pattern is this: we enjoy time together. If it's a Christmas gathering 20 years from now, what are we going to do in the downtime? We're going to play cards, we're going to play a game, we're going to do things that we've been doing for decades because we've learned this is how we enjoy spending time together. Yes, we love to ski. Yes, we love to do other things like that. But if we're just sitting around the dinner table, what does that look like? Sometimes it's conversational. Sometimes it's highly competitive and dangerous. So that's Wednesdays. Thursday, I mean, I think of it as guys' night. Mary Catherine, it's girls' night with their daughter Tess. They'll paint their nails and they'll watch a show, and they've gone through a bunch of series, and it's kind of like it's what they share together. And it's an anchor for their relationship. One of the series that they watched together was the Gilmore Girls. And, as silly or as trite as it may be to watch a show together, they had the opportunity earlier this year travel out to California. Tess was getting fitted for point shoes. Mary Catherine had a doctor's appointment, and they got to go to the set where they recorded the Gilmore Girls,
Mm.
and so it was a meaningful experience for them, but it tied to a shared history. And there's these little these little conversation points as they go, where it wasn't like planning on the big conversation about X, Y, and Z. It's just picking up little bits and pieces as we do life together. Family nights, and again, I want to stress it's a lot easier to orchestrate a lot of this and pull it off when kids are young. As they get older, they have other interests and friends and stuff like that. Um, Friday night is we watch a movie and have root beer floats and pizza, and we make the best pizza in town. So the nice thing about family night at the McAlvany's is on Fridays it's kind of like, could we come over? Because we're making pizza from scratch, and it's awesome. It's absolutely awesome. You won't find a better slice of pizza in Durango. But it's just, again, it's fun. And when you think about what we're trying to create, like the subtext is we want there to be so much sentimentality tied to having been a McAlvany that as they grow up, they're like, I see all that the world has to offer, and I just know that this is goodness. I just know that this is joy. I know that this is celebration. I know that this is laughter. And, the reality is family life is also conflicted, and there's moments of tension, and there's argumentation, and there's with boys, it can even be like full on brawling. How do you balance out those things where hearts are connected, even though the stuff in life, which is not easy, could just blow it to pieces? And that's what we want is to embed as much in, as we can, sort of the sentimentality of, I don't always get along with my brother, but I sure do love him. I've got an allowance for him being a knucklehead. He offended me beyond imagination, and yet, gosh, he's a good guy. We still enjoy spending time together. We can move forward. So that's what we're after. Weekends are a free for all. We don't have anything planned on weekends. We do church on Sunday evenings with about 10 different families in a small gathering. And so there's a little bit there at the tail end of the week as we launch into Mondays that's sort of recalibrating. That's kind of our week in a nutshell. And we are dealing with some of the things that were easier to pull off. They're getting harder. But there are aspects like guys' night. The fact that we play poker. Our 10-year-old is probably the best at the table. And he always wants to play poker because he thinks he's always going to win. We've had other families join us for guys' night because they're like, hey, are you guys doing poker on Thursdays? There's some draw there, which also means that it's actually easier to still orchestrate those things, even though there would be natural pulls away as kids are differentiating themselves and kind of, becoming their own people and want to do their own things and have other obligations.
Curious about the books for the summer. 5 books, all the same books for all four, or different books.
All different.
Who chooses them? Are they chosen by you and Mary Catherine, or do you choose them with each of the kids? Give them some options. Are there categories? I'm just curious at what type of topics and subjects you might lay out for them to consider for the summer.
Yeah, everybody's books are different, and it's Mary Catherine and I putting our heads together to say, what's in different categories. If it's literature, if it's economics or sort of cultural analysis, if it's so I'll give you a couple of examples. Our oldest is 18, and I have to look at this picture. One of the books we want him to read is titled Radical Hospitality. It's about Benedict. The subtitle is Benedict's Way of Love. And it just frames what hospitality can be within culture, not just within family, but it's with a focus on appreciating the needs of those around us and inviting them into our lives. What he's experienced, we'd like in our family, we'd like in that sort of value of hospitality, we want him to see it more in theory and begin to think about how he can cultivate his own life and his own practice outside of our family life.
Mhm.
Another one is Dr. Henry Cloud's Changes That Heal. Powerful book, a really powerful book.
Mhm.
It covers, setting boundaries and engaging in relationship and dealing with conflict and looking back and taking a look at your own life and saying, in what ways have I been wounded? And this is the reality is he's going to move into his 20s. There's going to be all levels of critique of things that we've done, shouldn't have, and things that we left undone. And so the gaps that are there in terms of our parenting and family life, he's going to have to take account for that and figure out how to kind of deal with the good, the bad, and the ugly. That one, if you wanted to put it in sort of the category of self-help or whatever, he's also reading Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules of Life. He's reading Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Foer. That's a fabulous book. And he's also got the Mirror of the Sea, which is a Joseph Conrad novel. And then there's a book I told him I was going to pull from my shelf. I couldn't remember the title. Friday mornings, I get together with a couple of high school boys and we do a Bible study. And one of the comments from this morning kind of tied in where Corinth was geographically and some of the changes that have happened in and around that part of the world. And it was really kind of fun because he was bringing in these insights, and it was geography meets sort of cultural development and whatnot. And there's a book that I want him to read on that. Yes, it's one more book, so you've got six. You shouldn't open your mouth. Now you've got six. Um, and he said, well, does that substitute for the biography that I have to read, or am I actually at seven? Because all of them
Oh,
have a biography to read
yeah.
too.
Okay.
My younger son, Discipline is Destiny by Ryan Holiday, Crazy Love by Francis Chan, Darwin on Trial by Philip Johnson, Dream Big by Bob Goff. So very, very different, very
Mhm.
different. And then for the younger kids, they're age appropriate. But yeah, so it's different, and we'll see if they actually read the books.
Well, yeah. So, is there a time when you'll get together with them individually at different points in time to talk about the book they're reading, or will this be end of the summer discussion? How will you bring this together?
Yeah, I mean, I sat with our 16-year-old on Wednesday, and we had probably a 30-minute conversation about a book he just finished, Resilience. He finished school a little
Mm.
early this year, and it's written by a Navy SEAL. He outlines basically there's a lot of difficulties and challenges in life, and he's just underscoring in a series of letters that he's written to friends the importance of resilience. So we started that conversation, and he's my least verbal communicator. So yeah, it was 30 grueling minutes of me kind of like trying to draw things out, and it's super challenging. So we still have some work to do on that, but we'll do that periodically through the summer, touch base with him and Where are you at? Kind of an
Hmm.
accountability, and what are you learning? Ask them some questions as they go.
Let's talk a little bit about redemption. That's a big piece of your book. You spoke about your father being a very entrepreneurial businessman. He traveled 75% of the time. So you were without your father for much of that time growing up. Resentment grew within you, and you really had some tough times there until you had that really kind of moment of truth at the Waffle House. We all have relationships in our life, whether they're with our immediate family or maybe second tiers of family, or just maybe it was a friend that we something broke apart. Let's talk about that because that's so
Yeah.
important. I know so many of all of us, and I know many of our members are dealing with situations right now that working on relationships that have fallen apart for different reasons. Give some context there, David, because I know this is a very personal part of your story.
Cat Stevens' song "Cats in the Cradle,"
Mhm.
resonates with me because you grow up with telling yourself, "I'll never be like this. I'm
Yeah.
never going to do that." And then next thing you know, that's exactly what you are. That's exactly what you're doing. And my dad's travel was something that was very formative or deformative, perhaps for our family. We had a lot of dysfunction that came from that. But out of that also came the fact that we're a second generation business, and there's different latitude. I've started two other businesses that are complementary to the first. The risk profile of being an entrepreneur in the second generation is very different than the risk profile of being a first gen creator. Hopefully, I've taken the baton and run with it, but I also recognize that it has cost me less. It's cost my family less for me to start those new businesses based on the sacrifice that my dad made. But there was a price to pay. The story for me came together in my early teens as I got into some trouble, and there should have been sort of a retribution or a reckoning or consequence for my actions. And it was perfectly timed. He extended kind of the olive branch to me and forgave me. I was ready for the fight. I wasn't ready for the proverbial peace pipe. And I just reflected on my life and thought, this has got to be different. My choices have to align to something else. So a very pivotal moment for me. What took place from that point forward was just a start. For me to recognize that I needed to move in a different path was probably my first recognition of intentionality and goal setting and sort of that reverse engineering. It's not language I would have used at the time, but that was really when it dawned on me that my life can look very different depending on my choices. The healing process and relationship took place over the next decade. I mean, it's not an overnight thing. You don't realize all the different scratches in the record, and sometimes they don't appear, they don't resurface until you come full cycle and you hit them again. And then, oh, yeah, there is another scratch there that needs to be looked at, needs to be talked about. And that's not easy stuff. That's hard work. And in a busy life, it takes a dedication and a commitment to working through some of those things. So to do it, I think you're talking about a set of values and commitments that you make to patience, to humility, to listening and trying to process from another person's perspective. These are life skills that again go onto that balance sheet that we're trying to create and grow, the intangible balance sheet. How are we cultivating being active listeners? How are we cultivating being fair in our communications and not, working out of hyperbole? You always do this. You never do that. Those kinds of things create real tension as you're trying to resolve bigger issues if you haven't set some ground rules for communication, if you haven't, established that we're going to be respectful and we're going to be kind and that's where all of a sudden the intangibles inform what you can do to rebuild and what you can do to find healing. These are the things that we want. We want to develop within our families trust and communication and the skills of conflict resolution. Takes time. It takes emotional energy. It does take the space. And as kids get older, I can see how very easily, somebody moves to New York City and we're in Colorado and we've got another one on the West Coast. And how do you even take the time?
Yeah.
That's been tough for me. We're in a better place today, but my brother and I had some significant conflict 4 or 5 years ago. And we just looked at it and we're like, yeah, we're not in the same place. We don't live in the same town. The amount of time it would take to fix this, forget it. And we still have some reparative work to do. But at the last family gathering, we kind of buried the hatchet at least, in the animosity that we were dealing with, that's behind us, but we still have reparative work. All right. Well, they're coming in July. Are we going to be intentional about, going rock climbing? Again, it's just like I don't want to sit down for 5 hours
Hmm.
and try to dig up the past and then
Right.
figure out, okay, actually the hatchet's not buried. You did this, you said that. We need some things that are fun for us to do. So we probably will. We'll probably go on some long hikes. And that's the equivalent of setting the table. It's
Yeah.
the venue where a conversation might occur
Mm.
that would bring some healing. And that's what I'm hopeful for. But we have to continually set the table metaphorically so
Right.
that those meaningful conversations can happen. Sometimes it's the fun conversations and it's the laughter. And in this case, it's we've got some work to do.
David brought so many great insights into our conversation. And one of the things that I love about David is that he is always eager not only to discuss these topics with the older generations, but also with young people. At Freedom Founders, we have a thriving next gen group made up of the adult children of our members. They focus on developing their financial acumen and building a strong foundation for successful, meaningful lives. David recently came and shared with our next gen group. He brought so much value and wisdom into their lives. He really connects with the young people. They respect him and his message resonates with them. I want to give you a sneak peek into what that looks like and how David engages the next generation in some of these conversations. This next segment is an excerpt from David McAlvany's recent conversation with our Freedom Founders Next Gen Tribe.
I know a guy. We'll just say his name is Howard. It's not his real name. He was a really bright guy. His mom was very wealthy. She was from a Texas oil family. I mean, wealthy enough. I'm not talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, but millions and millions. And Howard knew that as the only child, he was going to receive this inheritance. And Howard kind of delayed his development. He didn't make critical life choices about his career because he knew that in the end he'd be taken care of, right? So I knew Howard for about 40 years, 30 years. Yeah, 30 years. And so I knew him when he was in his 40s. I knew him when he was in his 70s and when his health started to fail. And you know what? His mom was still alive when he was 72 years old, and he still had not sort of gotten on with life. He had never made something of himself. He had never really dug into gifts and talents that God had given him. And I saw this as sort of a tragedy. He knew that he was going to receive something. And because of that, it was actually debilitating to his own development professionally, right? Very intellectually curious, definitely grew in that area. But as a professional, he could have made such an impact on people's lives through, again, the skill sets, the natural talents that he had. And yet his life is kind of like a non-event in history. He's a nobody. Again, how do we remember Howard? Nobody does. He didn't impact lives. He was, and a part of that was because he was just on hold waiting, right? So his mom's in her 90s. She lives to almost 100 years old, and he finally receives these millions of dollars in his mid 70s, and he's dead at 82. I look at that and I think receiving wealth can be debilitating. Understand that your parents have the best of intentions when they think we want to do something for you. If we can, we'll pay for college. If we can, we'll leave you something at the end of our lives. Just be aware that you have gifts and talents and this world needs you. Like your opportunity to impact lives, to be a major contributor, to change things, it depends on your level of engagement. And I'm just telling you, I see much less willingness to cultivate self and to just do the hard work with people who know they've got something coming, right? And I can think of a dozen different instances of trust fund kids who, yeah, they went to college, but they never really had a job. They didn't have to work. Yeah, they were 18 and they had a couple million in the bank, and they knew that when they turned 30, there was a couple million more. And some of them are really interesting people because they had the time to travel and do this and do that. They never cultivated themselves. And so even though they have all the money they'd ever need, receiving wealth was debilitating. So I would look at what you may receive as sort of icing on the cake. You're responsible for baking the cake. Go bake it. Figure out the right ingredients, figure out the best recipe, make the best damn cake you can. And if there's anything to put on top, great. It's just icing on the cake, right? But you're responsible for baking the cake.
Most of us start out in life with more time, energy, and optimism than money. That's what is so exciting about working with NextGen. The world is brimming with possibilities. If you learn how to invest in yourself early on, learn to provide value to the world, and to create freedom sooner, the compound effect on your life and those around you can be enormous. David McAlvany shared a cautionary tale with our NextGen of what it looks like to miss this opportunity to grow and invest in yourself.
The world has always had challenges, and we certainly will have our own version of challenges. How you understand them and navigate them, if you can navigate them skillfully, may be the difference between one version of success or failure. And I think that there are issues that you'll have to face that maybe your parents didn't have to. You also have advantages on your side that your parents are sort of playing catch up on. We've hired a couple of young people. One guy straight out of high school, and he's one of the most brilliant computer coders that I've ever met. He's studying computer science, but he's already writing, algorithms for us that automate trading. And it's just, I think what advantages he brings to us, and he has that an earlier generation, it might have been 1 in 10 million. You guys are of a generation that is much more fluid with technology. Yes, there's challenges ahead. I think a part of understanding a challenge is, or dealing with challenges, is understanding what it is and figuring out how to navigate it. My boys just did their first Spartan race 2 weeks ago. If you're familiar with that, it's like an obstacle course over 10K. So they're running 6 miles and they've got like 30 different obstacles. Some of the obstacles were really hard and they weren't ready for them. And now they look back and they say, oh, well, this is how you do it. Climbing a rope, there's a particular technique. There's a couple of things that if you dismantle the challenge, it's all manageable. You just have to sort of embrace it, move on through it. I think if you approach it that way, instead of being sort of a victim to circumstance or a victim to those challenges, they can be opportunities because there will be other people that just say, I can't do this. I got to quit. And your opportunity is, again, based in character. Never give up. Be resilient, be creative, collaborate. These are all things that allow you to face head on the challenges that are in the world today and face them boldly. I don't see anything on the horizon that, is taking us back to the Middle Ages or back to a form of serfdom where, the best you can do in life is maybe feed your family, but survival past the age of 35 is going to be a rarity. Now look at the world we live in. The average lifespan has improved. If we talk about wealth and the possibility of wealth creation, this is a period of time where it's kind of unprecedented in all of world history. So I think you've got plenty of opportunity, and the challenge is you just have to understand them. So to me, education is a huge part of that, to understand how the world works, to understand what would headwinds look like. I think one of the best things that you can do personally is stir your curiosity. And if you can develop sort of a voracious desire to know, to understand, this is where, when you think about investing, you can invest in real estate, you can invest in stocks and bonds. I'd say the first investment and the most important investment you can make is in yourself. And, investing in yourself means reading voraciously. It means learning from everyone. You've got parents who are willing to invest in you, invest in your future. They have friends. You have a community. You have, professors, teachers, coworkers to pay attention, learn from everyone, and appreciate that part of that learning process includes making mistakes. And that is absolutely okay. I look at mistakes as a form of tuition payment. You know, it's going to cost you something. Making a mistake, it's never fun, but get used to paying that tuition and learn from your mistakes, learn from your failures. I have, when it comes to investing, I have a journal, and the times that I have thought that X, Y, and Z was going to make sense and it didn't work, I have to then go back and say what was wrong with my assumptions, what was wrong with the environment, was it a good investment but not the right time? What did I miss? And if I'm able to identify what I did miss, I don't have to make the same mistake twice. Right. So, but that's investing in myself, in my knowledge. You start with investing in yourself.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you're interested in more concepts for younger adults and the next generation, you can check out my book, The Apprentice Model. I created this book as a guide for young adults to pass on some of the lessons and wisdom I've learned over the years and offer a non-traditional roadmap to success and freedom in life. You can find out more and order a copy of the book at apprenticemodelbook.com. That's apprenticemodelbook.com. Thanks for listening to the Freedom Founders podcast. Remember, always stay focused on your freedom. I'll see you next time.